I'm glad you reminded me what this is about, because the time of day certainly doesn't help. So I'm going to focus on key questions that I'm going to list in the next slide. So how can we prepare future creatives well? Like, the focus is on well, because there are many different ways how we can train the next generation of artists and technicians, but I'm trying to do it in a very specific way to set them up for success. Second question is how we can create meaningful immersive experiences in an educational environment. The educational environment differs from production environments or real-world environments. You probably all know this. So it comes with its own sets of challenges, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what these challenges are and how I suggest we can overcome them and how I have personally overcome them over the years. And then lastly, why does any of this actually matter? Why am I doing this? Why is this worthwhile doing? And I want to point at, because yesterday I saw this beautiful diagram there, or it's a matrix really by the VBLT about how to train all these technicians and all the people that are going to work in this industry. So I want to preface this by saying this approach that I'm suggesting works a little bit differently, and there's no particular reason for that, only that I have been evolving this approach over the last 10, 12 years. And it just turns out this way, and I'm always refining it to see what resonates with students. And also, after a couple of years, you can actually gauge whether this is successful, because theory is one thing, practice is quite another. And at this point, I have a good number of students who are very successful in the industry, anything from being in technical jobs, working in virtual production, but also in leadership positions, let it be at FIFA or at other large productions, or on Broadway or on Hollywood. So I do think there's something to this approach which is quite unique, and it's not focused on any particular kind of career. I am going to focus on one specific class that I teach as an example. Okay. And those four ingredients I'm going to focus on are meaningful work for engaged learning, creating effective guardrails, embracing multidisciplinary skills, and assembling the right mix of resources. A little bit about myself. Some of you may not know me. I'm not saying this to talk necessarily about myself, but to provide some context for why I think I have some authority to talk about this subject. So I've been a designer for, Zach said, 25 years or so. I graduated from Rose Bruford College in the UK in 2001 with a bachelor's degree in lighting design. I was a light jockey in Cologne, Germany, where I was born. I was a movie electrician in Cologne. And through studies, I've actually discovered projection design. And I've been around long enough to have programmed slide projectors with Datatron tracks, and used Catalyst when it was brand new, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why I've done all this for the last two and a half decades is because I've always been driven by telling stories, and telling stories meaningfully and engage audiences. And that meant being judicious about the tools that I choose. And sometimes when you have a design or you're passionate about a story, the tool that is available doesn't actually work the way you think it needs to work, or the tool doesn't even exist, at which point creativity and innovation comes into place. I worked on Broadway a couple of times. I moved from the UK to New York, and from New York to Austin, Texas, where I led an MFA program for about 9 years. And recently, which means after the pandemic, I moved to Mesa, Arizona, where I have taught a variety of different students with different backgrounds from different schools for about 2.5 years. So that is a new environment for me, and I've been refining it. But for the first time, I actually am in an environment where there aren't what I would call silos, which is where one area does virtual production, another area does virtual production, another area does virtual production, and they're kind of competing for resources and faculty and students and resources. So this is a very different environment, and I'm very happy that I can try out and explore and evolve my process there. I teach a variety of classes, which is also very unusual for a university environment in my experience, because I can teach media design, I teach motion capture, I teach the history of media technology, I teach, of course, 3D projection mapping, previs, design and production experiences, emerging technologies colloquium, which means I talk to all students who are interested in emerging technologies regardless of their focus or their background. And I mentor undergraduates, graduates, and PhD students. I develop curriculum, I consult, because I'm sort of an expert, but also have a lot of half knowledge about areas that are kind of emerging, because they're emerging, and a lot of my colleagues and even staff members might not even have come across some of these technologies. So it's important to also share some of the stuff that I know and that I've come across. And I generally model how to stay curious and stay engaged and do meaningful work. So I've come from Cologne, and I moved to Arizona, and that's kind of where I am right now. And I've discovered that there are some things that change, but there's a lot of things that change that stay the same over the years. And you realize that when you reach my age, that you are getting older, but actually I'm still the same person that I was 25 years ago, and I care about very much the same things. I just find different ways of staying engaged and doing the things that I care about. Herberger, by the way, that's the institute that I teach in, the Herberger Institute, and I come to talk about this later. So that's enough about me. So these 4 ingredients I want to talk about: meaningful work for engaged learning, creating a container, effective guardrails, embracing a variety of skills, assembly misspelled of the right mix of resources. I try to find some symbols that are kind of a little whimsical, which are personal choices. So let's start with the first thing: meaningful work for engaged learning. Yesterday, a gentleman talked about purpose. So I like to use the word meaningful. No particular reason for that. I just prefer it. In design, we talk a lot about purpose, but in learning and engagement, meaningful is something that resonates with me personally. So first of all, my own take on meaningful work is obviously derived from my own work. So of course, I like to design shows that, if possible, make some sort of difference or resonate with me, or feel I'm making a difference. But there are other things that are meaningful. There are things like working as a team, working with people that you like working with. And I've also discovered that oftentimes it's not necessarily that the work itself needs to want to change the world. Sometimes it's enough to work with people that I like working with and work on something that is fun, that entertains a lot of people. Because bringing joy to people can also be very meaningful. What that means is also that what is meaningful to a person is entirely subjective. It could be something different to each of you. But it's important that it's meaningful because it drives you forward, it keeps you engaged, it keeps you curious. Most people that I've come across in my career in live entertainment, at some point or another, worked on a production, worked in a team, and they made something. And that was the moment where they realized this is their tribe, this is their people, this is where they want to work. And most people I know, they stick with it. They might change careers, but they stick with it because they like what they're doing and they think they found it by accident, which is probably true, but it was meaningful, which is why they stuck with it. So examples of meaningful work and the access point to that for my students. Here are some posters from the 3 classes that I have posters of so far. I use stories and narratives as an entry point. And stories and narratives are really important because they drive design. I always have to point back all my students to what's the story you're telling and why you're telling it. And that basically provides a skeleton for a good design, a purposeful design. But the trick here is that I'm asking the students to to develop their own stories and to propose issues, causes that they care about, which is, in my experience, pretty unusual. Oftentimes, a director or a professor will say, this is the show, this is my vision for it, and please help me realize this, you're an expert, go. Right? In this case, I'm giving the students agency to propose their own stories. And that has been incredibly productive and has driven a lot of really interesting work. There is multiple reasons for this. Of course, one of us that when people tell their own stories, they already care. They care about the stories that they're talking about, and that what drives them forward to learn, to tweak their designs, to reiterate, and to keep going. So they have their own standards and their own reasons for developing design and moving everything forward. I'm going to go through this a little bit. So you have in the top corner is a project called Warped Reality. That was about mental health. And they used a variety of tools to create an experience for people to walk into. Generally, it's about 150 people that walk into the space and to experience a character who has a mental disability. And they wanted the audience to sympathize and realize that different people see the world differently. Then we have Songs That Linger, which is about how languages, particularly indigenous languages, and knowledge can be lost, but it's worth preserving. And it tries to do that through immersive sound and very evocative images. Then Abandoned Spaces is about architecture and how architecture sometimes gets overwhelmed or taken over by nature, and they used LiDAR scans to animate architecture. Then 52 Hertz is, and there's a lot of projects about marine life amongst my students because I care about the environment. It's about a lonely whale who is not accepted by its peers, but eventually is. And that's a true story because he makes a sound, or it makes a sound at a different frequency from all the others. So it's also about loneliness and solitude. And then Doe was really about fun. So we built a 15-foot dodecahedron, which is a Euclidean 3D object, for those of you who care. But it's very difficult to 3D map. That was the idea. And they turned this dodecahedron into a character and animated its face with real-time face tracking. So that's kind of how the story drives the design. Then we have Digital Terrarium, which was about how digital technologies are kind of in conflict with nature, or are they? So it basically juxtaposed the worlds that we're kind of grappling with right now, where we want to preserve nature, we care about nature, we care about the planet, but here are all these digital technologies. And can they be as engaging? Can they be the same? What does one do better than the other? Reflection on Us is about community, and it was basically imagery driven by interviews that the students did with the community. That's the community of Mesa in Arizona. And it was a very moving experience for the people that visited, because the community felt heard, which is one of the goals of some of the classes that I teach at the Mix Center, is to engage with the community and show them that this emerging technology is not something that's over here and it's for a minority and access is really hard, but it's also something that can matter to them, and it's something that can be useful to tell stories that they care about. The last row are current posters. Those have not been realized yet, but that happens in about 4 weeks. There's one about Golden Record, which is a true story, about the golden record that was sent into space, and it's about how the world has changed and is changing. Orange Experience is about oranges, as you might expect, but which is relevant to Mesa because there's a large citrus growing community and history there. But it's also about what we're doing to nature and how nature is changing, because the story is about how people go in the future where there are no more oranges and they come back and get to taste oranges and discover how amazing oranges are. So it's whimsical, but I don't know whether it's going to work because they haven't done it yet. Harmony of the East is about Indian and Chinese culture and how they are in conversation. There's always a space exploration project about discovery and research, which is the Deep Space Rescue, and Fading Corals is a marine project about what happens to the oceans due to climate change. Okay, so those are the stories of the students, and those are the stories of the students that they care about. The second ingredient is effective guardrails. So that means I create a container. The idea of a container is to limit choices, but also to focus every participant. So in a lot of my work, that's usually architecture, because a theater or any space might have clear walls, clear dimensions, and that means you can't put stuff everywhere, you can't walk everywhere. In a 15-week semester, I need to be sure that the students actually can succeed, so the guardrails also ensure that they will, because with less choices, there is more time spent on the relevant things. In Mimic's real-world practice, because there are always constraints. You can't do everything. And the guardrails also ensure that the students don't get paralyzed because they have too many choices. And that happens in the real world as well. When somebody tells a designer, do whatever you want, most of them freeze. Because they like to have something to grapple with or something to rub up against. There needs to be some restriction. Usually not much happens when you give people too many choices. So it provides focus. Here's an example of some guardrails or common guardrails that I use. So this is the architecture of the EIS, which is the Enhanced Immersion Studio at the Mix Center in Mesa. So that's the location. It's very clear defined dimensions. Then it's not longer than 15 minutes, the experience. It's for the general public, 150 people. Sometimes there's more, which is pretty impressive in my experience. And they need to have a clear narrative arc. The narrative needs to extend beyond the physical space. In other words, there could be some sort of story that happens and that the audience engaged with even before they enter. Or it could just be a kiosk. It really depends what they want to do. I just need them to think about the whole narrative before and after, so it becomes a bit of an arc. So that sort of exposes the students to an idea that it doesn't need to be a self-contained thing that happens in one room only. And then, of course, it needs to have imagery, lighting, and sound at a minimum. Oftentimes, they're really drawn to interactivity as well, as you might guess. Did something change? Oh, there we go. It also does something else. It focused the team on the variety of skills that they have in the room. So what I do is I ask the students to self-identify what skills they have or what skills they would like to learn. And I also ask them what groups they like to work in. Because we can't really realize, in this case, 21 projects. I can realize probably 5 out of 21 projects. And so they get thrown into groups. And then I try to make sure that they have the skills that they need to succeed, which they don't know at this point because they have never done this before. A lot of students have no production experience because they're not production students. They come from all sorts of different backgrounds. And I create a little database that looks a bit like this, and which means I can see it eventually when there are projects that appear whether all the skills that I need to succeed are actually existing in that project, or whether they express the desire to learn what is required. That's a little bit like matchmaking or speed dating, whatever you want to call it. So it's a little bit of back and forth, but it's really important that they are able to produce something at the end and that they experience success, because otherwise they might decide that this is not for them, and I want them to stay engaged. I also know, if I look at this chart, that there are some things I need to teach because they don't know certain things. If they declare they have an interest in, say, touch designer, and they don't have a person with touch designer skills in their group, then that's something I need to cover. Here are some examples of the kind of backgrounds that the students come with. So you can see it's not just traditional theater backgrounds. I also have students with computer science backgrounds, UX, UI, architecture, choreography, fabrication, engineering. They all are able to take this class, which is very exciting to me, because in the past the problem has been a lot of designers, not many people that can actually realize designs. Or the other way around, I end up with a lot of creative technologists or people that think they are technicians, and they struggle to come up with concepts. And there's so much diversity in how experience can be built and the kind of skills that feed into it today. And the students know this because they watch all these cool projects on social media or at trade shows, and they want to do this. They don't know how to unpack that. So I'm unpacking it with them in the classroom by showing what all the skills are, what the names are for the skills, and then allow them to work together. This is my current group of students. It's about 21 of them. They range from undergraduates to master students, and they're from many different degree programs. They really long for classes that show them how to make a thing. There's a lot of classes, usually in universities, where the students get taught how to make beautiful concepts, how to come up with beautiful design ideas. There are not many classes where students experience putting on a show, unless it's a theater department, where that is the standard, but it doesn't happen outside of theater departments, generally. Not in a research university. I know there are places where this happens, but in a research university, in my experience, that is pretty rare. So there are benefits to all this, right? Because everybody learns from one another. Everybody gets to appreciate it, that somebody brings something to the table that will benefit the group, that will benefit the project. And they become reliant on one another. They learn teamwork. They learn collaboration. They learn proactive troubleshooting, and they find solutions together. Normally, and I'm speaking generally about education, there are challenges. So the assembling the right mix of resources in education is generally hard, and immersive experiences are really helpful there, because they are uniquely challenging because they require a lot of expertise for many different areas, all at once. So I chose them because it is so challenging, because I want to model how this can work and how you can create something with all this diverse expertise that's in the room. This is an example of one school at a larger university. I picked pretty random departments that are very common in universities. So you have an art department, you have the performing arts, which includes theater, music, dance, a film department, engineering, and design. These are very common. Now, in an ideal world, if you're creating an immersive experience, you can draw on all of these. because you need art for content, you need the performing arts for stagecraft, collaboration, stage management, you need film for acquiring content, film production, beautiful imagery, you need engineering for solutions, building systems, and you need design for concepts and also content. And what is inside of design sometimes differs a little bit. Because sometimes design also includes things like VR and AR, certainly in our case. But this is a general overview. Now, hidden in here is this piece which sometimes gets overlooked, which is the production part. And that is important because if I have students from other schools other than theater, they may have never produced a show in their life. And it's really important that they experience how to make a thing. Because once you've made a thing, you feel a sense of accomplishment, you have shared something, you also actually know what it means to create something as a team. So the theater part is really important. What often happens, though, is that these departments are in different schools. They don't share resources. And those resources include not just gear and space, but they also include their experts you don't have access to. You don't have a faculty member who's an expert in Unreal Engine. You don't have an expert who's a lighting designer. You don't have an expert who is a DOP. You don't have an expert who can teach touch designer. So it's really hard to do this. And I've discovered this myself a couple of times. So you make friends with faculty, you make friends with people in other departments to make this work, but you start over every semester because you have to convince 3 chairs and 2 deans that this is a worthwhile project realizing. So I got a little frustrated, but I had time to think about my frustration during the pandemic, as I'm sure many of us. And then so I decided to maybe I need to take a different approach. And I was very lucky to get hired by ASU, and they had just opened this place. So I'm going to play this little video, I hope. So this is the Mix Center in Mesa. It's possible that many of you are not familiar with Mesa or where Mesa is. Mesa is a city about 500,000 people outside of Phoenix. Some people call it a suburb. It's not really a suburb. As cities go, like they just sprawl, and they then become one big metropolitan area. And the same is true with Mesa. Mesa is maybe 2/3 the size of Frankfurt. Because it's Arizona, it's about 9 times the size of Frankfurt. So it's very wide. There's a lot of space. And there's a lot of nature. It's only that nature looks very different because the city is in a desert like most of Phoenix. The weather is very constant. The biggest problem is heat and water, as you might expect. So those are also things that the students care about, heat and water. This is an experiment. I don't know whether somebody from ASU will agree with that necessarily, but it's about a vision to create a building that houses different technologies, different experts, and all the resources that are required to create new kinds of experiences under one roof. How that works, my classes are kind of part of that process. So I know there's a lot of people here who care deeply about technology, so I just want to show you a little bit about what we have in the room. So it's really, I mean, I would say tricked out. We have industry standard everything, also because the list of resources was built with faculty. So it wasn't administrators who put this together. Experts were asked to contribute to this list. It's probably not everything, but the things that I care about, of course, media servers, and computers, signal infrastructure, immersive audio, and workshops, and staff, crucially important staff, because nothing really works if you don't have people behind the scenes that make the stuff happen. Some of the stuff I had to also consult on because the building was not fully equipped when I joined. So that was exciting because I get to basically design my own lab, which is this space here. This is called the EIS. It stands for Enhanced Immersion Studio. It's about 45 feet wide, 50 feet deep, and about 60 feet tall. So it's a 3-story black box, fully soundproofed with flying plugs, which are basically square pieces of rigging that go up and down, where we rig everything from, it has a catwalk that the audience can use as well, and state-of-the-art lighting, state-of-the-art projection, and 42-channel Maya Sound Space Map Go system, which got recently installed. And it's a pretty amazing space to have it in a university, let alone anywhere, really. So I use it to teach my classes, which is a generous way of saying I use mockups for 2/3 of the semester and pre-visualization in the last 3 to 4 weeks. I move everything that has been prevised and built at scale into that space. Also because it mimics an actual production process. Actually, it actually still stretches out an actual production process because usually you don't have 3 weeks. But that's what you do in education. You stretch things out a little bit to allow the students to learn. So here are some impressions of student work. This is kind of what this looks like. This was the first showcase in fall 2023. You see these sort of curved screens, of which we have many. That was Scrim at the time. That's been replaced because it didn't work very well. But we got it because we wanted the audio to come through. And if you've ever been in creative meetings, convincing everybody to agree on one solution is hard. Sometimes you have to go through multiple iterations. So now we have a different material that is still transparent, but a great projection material. So we're kind of all learning together all the time. You see a marine project there in the picture. That class was taught with Disguise and Mapping Matter. And at the bottom is a picture of a project that was about local art. And the students also used 360 footage that they acquired, which was pretty interesting to see in a 300-degree kind of drum shape. And the students learned that, and I haven't pointed at this at this point, it's very different from experiencing imagery at a very large scale as a person with other people than seeing it on a computer screen. So they were surprised by the speed at which things move. They're surprised by even that they cast shadows, but by the vibrancy. But importantly, they were surprised by how they felt when they saw the general public see their work, which is how I felt when I first had an audience in a theater show, which made it meaningful to me at the time, and this made it meaningful for them. And it was an important step in the development of this class because students talk to each other. Saying that you're teaching a 360-degree immersive class is one thing, but when the students actually tell their peers that that was something that they enjoyed or was meaningful to them, that really helps. And so I got to build on this. So the next time, I tricked it out a bit more. I now have 3D built scale models of the space, also to model how the architecture constrains everything. I have 3D printed people that are, of course, everything to scale. There happen to be staff members in the building. The students have workspaces where they can program things, where they can make content. We have not quite yet a render pipeline, but we're working on it. And of course, we have trained all our staff to use all the gear that we have. So this was fall 23. And now here are some more examples of the realization in spring 24. This is the project I pointed at earlier with the LiDAR scans. So we used the Leica 360 to scan different buildings and turn that into point clouds, which then move cameras through in Blender. And that's based on the story that the students wanted to tell. And you don't know whether any of this is actually going to be successful or whether it resonates with anybody until you do it. But these projects were very successful. In education, or maybe even us here in the room, we're all specialists in our respective industries, and when you talk about these technologies all the time, but the general public has no idea what I'm talking about. When I talk about immersive experience, when I talk about some sort of AI-assisted workflow process, when I talk about mixed reality, this, mixed reality that, virtual production, they have no idea. It's all gobbledygook. But if they can walk into a space without any gear whatsoever and be blown away, and their children are laughing, their children having a good time, that is very meaningful to them. And it's very meaningful to the students who created it, because they feel they've actually made something that matters, made something that their parents enjoy, and that's certainly also something I can relate to, something that their parents can understand. I don't think my parents quite understand to this day what I do for a living, but if I can show them a picture like that, they get it. So, conclusions. The technology has changed significantly over the last couple of years, or I'd say decades. Everything seems like it's moving faster. Things get more complicated. So I'm trying to teach the student a process how to cut through that by engaging them with telling their own stories. It has a really important side effect, because they're engaged because they're telling their own stories. They're also making really judicious choices about the tools that they're using, the technology that they're learning. They can assess whether using a specific AI tool is useful, whether an industry standard tool is useful, or even what it does, because they're driven by the desire to tell the story that they care about. So it sort of cuts through the clutter a little bit through that focus. It also teaches them how to work as a team. It teaches them how to think critically. It teaches them how to navigate professional environments and realize something that is meaningful to them. And so they will discover something about the direction that they want to take in their life. They don't have to necessarily become designers. They don't have to become technicians. They can make any choice that they want, because they're experiencing agency. Agency about how to lead their lives, how to move forward. And that is very meaningful to me, and it's very important to the university as well, because we're really focused on innovation and creativity, and we want people to be leaders, ultimately. I know a lot of universities say that probably, but it works in the sense that I've seen people create innovations. I've seen people file for patents. I've seen people go to startups afterwards. Not startups, startup incubators, I meant to say. I also have students who say, oh, you know what? I don't need to become a creative. I'm much happier over here. I'll become a disguise programmer. So it's really a way for them to find their way. That's what I wanted to share with you this morning, and thank you for listening.